Okay, here we go. This is, what's this called? Soul Rejected 200. This is chapter 2. And this is also found on Wattpad, which we'll link later. In case if you guys don't know, in chapter 1, Zephaniah was watching after Jody's son. He was babysitting for her while she was at work. And she came back. She was acting a little weird, and he left the house. And then it changed scene to a cult sacrifice scene at an old church. And so we're kind of experiencing this weird, like there's clearly on the spiritual level, bit of some warfare going down. So it's, yeah, super interesting. So this is chapter 2. Here we go. Zephaniah didn't like the night, but he'd gotten used to walking home this late. Still, there wasn't something eerie to him about being out after dark. He always felt he wasn't alone, even though it was far past the time that people are normally out and about. His apartment was only a few blocks away, so most evenings had him walking as quickly as he could through the neighborhood, while trying a little too hard not to look scared. That night he didn't make it very far. Zeph let his thoughts distract him from the darkness around him. Why would Jody lay on his lap like that? She had never done that to him before, so why start now? Did she mean anything by it? No way. And it didn't matter anyway, since Zeph was always a loyal friend to Eric, even if Eric wasn't always loyal back. Zeph let his mind ponder that thought. Zeph was lost in memories and could have beens, but barely made it to the end of Jody's street when he felt a rumble beneath his feet. An earthquake? Just then a purple flash lit the sky behind him. If he had seen it, he might have stopped walking, realizing this was no ordinary earthquake. Too bad he didn't see it. "Stop, you imbecile!" A voice came like a shouted whisper. In the evening it sounded like the wind itself was insulting him. He wasn't trained in any martial arts, but he'd seen more than a few old kung fu movies as an adolescent. He froze in the ready position, armed with only his karate chop hands. "Hello?" Zeph asked the knight, hoping it didn't respond. A response did come, and in the form of an angry hiss. "Go back, Zephaniah. Just go the F back." The hair on the back of Zeph's neck stood up on end, and his head turned around to see there was a new car parked on the street outside Jody's house. He started speed walking back anxiously. Even squinting, he couldn't make out the car parked in front or the person lying out on the lawn. His pace quickened. Nearing a jog, he was still unsure what his eyes were seeing. Soon, it was clear that the vehicle parked in the street was from a local pizza shop. That didn't make sense to Zeph, since he was just there a few minutes before and he didn't order pizza. He dropped into a hurried run. In a few seconds, he was close enough to see a body in a pizza delivery polo laid out on the grass. Zeph kept running, stealing a glimpse at the man whose back and head both faced the night sky. The man's head was twisted a complete 180, and his last expression was locked in fear. Zeph's attention rose to the front door, and when he saw it, his pace became a full sprint. The door was wide open. "Jody?" He stopped just past the entrance. He looked left and right, seeing no one in the kitchen or living room. Something heavy thumped the floorboards down the hallway from Dylan's room. His heart sank, but his voice spiked. "Dylan? Jody?" His breaths were sharp and short as he rushed down the hall and pushed open the door to Dylan's room. There, Jody stood with her back to Zeph. She was clearly standing and clearly alive. Dylan was there too. He figured he got to them before anything bad could happen. Zeph deflated his worry in a breath. "Oh, thank God. Jody, why was the door open? I know I closed that." "Zeph!" Dylan shouted out in a tone inexplicable to Zeph. It was confusing. Here he was, safe with his mother, but Zeph had never heard him so scared. Jody reacted to the plea quicker than Zeph. She snatched him up by the throat, easily lifting him with one hand. Jody was choking her own son. "Hey, stop!" Zeph pushed further into the room and reached for her. "Hey, what the F are you doing?" He yanked on her shoulder. She barely budged an inch. He continued to pull at her. She turned only her head to him with slow deliberation. Her face was twisted, bent into an inhumanly furious shape. Her eyes were hot coals and her clenched teeth ground enamel when she spoke. The words reeked like battery acid. "You have been a thorn in my side for too long." Even her voice was unnatural. A guttural growl squeezed through this tiny woman's frame. There was no trace of her usual tired demeanor. She was awash with rage. Zeph was taken aback. "Soon, Pawn, I will kill you myself." With that, she turns back to Dylan. What are you talking about, Jody? He avoided looking at her again, but Dylan was in danger. He moved past her and tried to pry her hand from the boy's neck. He yanked on the swollen, veiny arm and tried to wedge his sweaty fingers between hers. She was stone, unrelenting, unmoved. Wait your turn. And on the last word, she used her free hand to clamp down on Zeph's wrist. In one motion, she effortlessly flung him across the room. He was airborne before he hit the wall. A loud crack sounded from the collision and he collapsed to the floor. Dazed, he felt his shoulder ringing all the way down to his pinky. He tried to clutch at the pain with his right arm, but he couldn't feel it. He looked down to where his right hand should be. In its place where two splintered bones jutted from mangled flesh, fountaining crimson ooze all over his lap and other arm. His vision swam as realization set in. She ripped off his hand. He couldn't make sense of it. He watched as Jody nonchalantly dropped his rent hand to the floor. To her, it was nothing. It wasn't worth her interest. The room blurred, and soon his eyelids felt heavy on his eyes. They closed on his vision like a curtain fall. His consciousness faded into black. In the darkness, he stood at the foot of a gigantic hourglass. It was as tall as a building, and instead of sand, the top was dripping a swimming pool of blood. It poured faster than sand, and there was something inside waiting within. He squinted to see who it was. It was him. The other Zeph was waiting in the top of the hourglass, frantically splashing to reach the opening beneath him. He was trying to plug it. He would gasp for air and try to shove his own arm into the opening where blood was flowing out to the bottom of the hourglass. Zeph watched his other self struggle and pant. He couldn't stay beneath the surface too long and had to come up for air. When he did, the bloody Zeph would shout something into the glass, muffled. Zeph stood there as he slowly came to realize what he was seeing. He was watching himself struggle against dying. Still, he couldn't tell what the other him was saying behind the glass. It was frantic but decisive. He could almost hear it as he leaned closer. When he finally heard the words, he was back in the room. Jody was no longer choking Dylan. The two were floating above the ground. Her arm was throbbing and extended to the boy. She was chanting the incantation. Invisible magic flowed from her fingertips. The boy would soon become the new arbiter of the apocalypse. She would soon be walking through the gate. She would soon claim her throne. As she chanted, the bothersome thorn in her side was muttering something she couldn't hear. But he got louder and louder until the sound of his own voice woke him. Not yet! Zeph was standing now. He wasn't sure when he stood up. Not yet! He didn't care. Jody must be stopped. Not yet! Not yet! Not yet! Zeph threw himself at Jody's extended arm. It was growing purple and bloated with muscle and vein. Even as he clung to it, the arm would not move. He wrapped his leg around Jody, clutched her arm with his one hand, and tugged again with all his strength. It wasn't enough. She kept chanting, unfazed by his efforts. He had no choice. He had to stab it. Using his dismembered arm, he plunged his jagged bone into the meaty forearm, tearing and ripping at the plump flesh. The sensation was unlike any pain he felt before, so he stabbed again, and again, and again. To him, it felt like he was trying to shove a dirty dishcloth between the splinters of his bone. Her arm was a punctured fire hose, under so much pressure that the blackened blood sprayed the walls and misted the air. His blood didn't have the same pressure that it had even moments ago, now just pulsing between haggard strikes. She began to scream her chant like a banshee, holding his focus through the pain. Her pitch-black eyes locked on Zeph as he continued to stab at her arm with his own. She gnashed her teeth and delivered a hammer fist downward onto him. He was knocked off of her once more like brushing off some bothersome insect. Zeph's body fell fast, only to be caught by the hard floor. Whatever strength found him before must have kept falling, lost between the gaps of the floorboards. With his remaining will, he kept his eyes open, still muttering the words that empowered him before. He managed to reach a hand up and grab on her pant sleeves, still floating above him. She stopped chanting. You just couldn't wait to die, could you, Zephaniah? The pads of her feet descended gently into a puddle of his and her blood. Her bloodied arm stayed raised. It continued to funnel magic toward the boy. Zeph doesn't let go of the fabric of her jeans. His eyes were locked on Dylan. Too late. Despite your efforts, it has already begun. But before you die, I have a gift for you. Dunball. None will accept you after this. She grabs at the air in front of her, and a blade materializes from nothing. It was a long dagger with a twisting edge that seemed to repel all light. It was a silhouette in the universe, a cutout of where a weapon should be. Good riddance, pawn. The queen must reign. And she plunged the blade deep into his chest. It pushed through his heart and pierced bone, pinning him to the wood beneath him. He let out a pitiful gasp. He blinked out tears, helplessly watching Dylan lose consciousness. A glowing orb crackled behind the boy, and Zeph refused to look away. The blade seemed to melt and fill his veins, making them frigid and black. But even on the last beat of his heart, he never took his eyes off of him. As he faded, Jody took to the air again and resumed her incantation. Floating droplets of blood, and Zephaniah remained suspended by ancient magic in the air. Reality around the boy bent and warped, stretched and pulled in rhythm with the syllables of the demonic chant. The orb behind Dylan tore a hole in the very fabric of the universe and opened a hellish portal. The edges of the portal raged with swirling magical energy. Growing sigils framed the opening, crackling with arcs of purple electricity. As she continued, she noticed the trails of lightning slowed in midair. She watched the energy choose its direction as slow as a stream of water carving a new path in the earth. Soon, the lightning seemed to come to a complete stop. Her eyes widened. The electricity wasn't slowed down. Instead, there was way too much time filling that moment. Jody realized that someone managed to cram more time into the present. It was a spell she was very familiar with as an oracle. It only worked to inflate time, but she couldn't figure out why this was happening now. She didn't know until she noticed movement in her periphery. Zeph was to his feet. His posture was that of a marionette, crudely lifted by uneven strings. The blood previously pouring out from him seemed to stop flowing. It just puddled on his chest, defying gravity and refusing to fall anymore. On his forehead, carved into the flesh, are hellish inscriptions that roughly translate to instinct and speed. Deep purple light glowed from the sigils with a matching light that poured out from his eyes. He lumbered his body weight forward and drove his front foot down, splintering the floor panels. Jody managed to let out 2 words before he took off. Kill him! Zeph never took his eyes off Dylan. His heart stopped beating, but the rest of his body obeyed his command. It was faster than before, angrier, and it should have hurt. He felt his femurs crack in several places as he leapt towards Dylan. It didn't matter. Numbness. He needed to reach Dylan. Everything blurred in his eyes, but he never took his eyes off Dylan. He knew his path was true. He didn't see the other figure in the room with them. A sorcerer demon lunged towards Dylan from the other side. She was closer, but he was faster. Demonic tentacles emerged from the portal, only slightly affected by the time distortion. Zephaniah reached Dylan at the same time as the sorcerer. The 3 of them collided, and the tentacles dragged them into its portal. The flashing light became only dark. On the other side of the universe, Zeph splashed into a thick, murky fluid. What was once sideways was the new down, and he fell downwards only as fast as the fluid permitted. It was dim and hazy in a way that made it difficult for anyone to see more than a few feet away. After passing through the portal, Zeph was no longer clutching Dylan. Not only that, the boy was nowhere to be found. Zeph was slowly descending, upside down in this viscous world, and Dylan was nowhere to be seen. Finally, he tilted his head back to look down further into the murky abyss. At the end of his vision, he could see the familiar shape of the boy, but he had a glow to him. He was emanating light. Zeph attempted a frog-like swimming motion toward him, but didn't even complete a stroke when his leg was caught in a bear trap. It was the witch. She dug razor-sharp claws deep into the flesh of his calves and furiously climbed him, clawing his thigh and hip. The only thing he noticed was that he was slowing down from reaching Dylan. He didn't feel the wounds, and he refused to take his eyes off of the boy. Dylan's light glinted off of what he was descending into. It was an enormous, truly maelstrom set of lamprey teeth that circled him. Each tooth looked to be the size of a sedan, slowly emerging from shadow. Zeph tried to swim again, but the witch had already crawled up to him, face to face. He finally looked at her just in time to see her razor-sharp teeth wrap around the side of his face. She thrashed at flesh, scraped skull, and ripped free chunks off Zephaniah's face. She took his eye. He didn't feel it. He knew that he should have. He felt no pain, only emotion, only rage. He looked at her with his good eye and grabbed her by the throat with his good hand. She struggled and clawed at his wrist, but this time he was unmoving. He was stone. The vice tightened on her neck, and he pulled her toward him. In the same motion, he shoved the jagged bone of his dismembered arm through her eye. She screamed out her cries, but her cries didn't reach his ears in the void. She flailed and clawed, ripping his chest and guts. She pulled and cut through organs, but Zephaniah did not recoil. He pursed his lip, pushing the arm deeper into her head. His face pinched as his arm overcame the resistance. He looked down his nose to meet her eye to glowing eye. To him, she wasn't the vile she-demon. She was a threat to Dylan. His single-minded rage plunged his arm through her optical canal, cracking skull bone. Her face showed complete terror. That wasn't good enough. He traded the grip on her throat to cup the back of her head. He squeezed his fist around a handful of hair which pulled at her scalp. With a final push, his forearm bones found her brain and easily cut through it. He kept going until his bones would go no further. He wore her head like a glove, his bones scraping the back of her skull. Her expression loosened. Zeph's mangled face was the last thing she saw when she died. Retracting his arm, he tucked his torn leg between the savage chest. He moved the cadaver lower, positioning his feet on her shoulders. He spared her one last look before his focus returned to his true objective. He looked down again to Dylan and kicked off the dead demon. Zephaniah was descending faster, and he was finally approaching the glowing boy. He was still unconscious. He wouldn't want to see his not-uncle like this, anyway. Zeph didn't know what he would do when he got to him either. He didn't have many good limbs left to swim, even if it were just him. As he approached, the glow illuminated what was left of Zephaniah. Zeph could feel this. It was light. It was warm. When he did reach him, all he could do was simply clutch him with the one good arm. Dylan seemed to reflexively clutch him back, and they floated deeper into the mouth of this other universe. This was finally it. Zeph knew he was dying. Actually dying this time. He could feel it. His final moments were memories of him and Dylan, nights when Jody was working late. Dylan convinced Zeph to let him stay up. He insisted that he wouldn't get scared or have nightmares. They would watch movies late into the night. Dylan would cover his eyes at any sign of violence or horror. Those nights, Jody would call Zeph after he went home at 2 or 3 in the morning. "I told you he can't watch those movies," she would say, trying to console a restless Dylan. "If I have to suffer, so do you. Stay awake until he falls to sleep." Zeph would be lying if he said he didn't like those calls. He would sometimes stay up so he didn't miss it. Not that she would let him ignore it. She would keep calling if he didn't answer. He wished he could hear that voice again. As they drifted into the mouth of the beast, Zeph felt somehow that he saved Dylan. As soon as that thought occurred to him, so did all the pain. The hole in his chest, his missing eye, his missing hand, all the tears, cuts, and wounds came to him at once. He convulsed, and blood began to float away from him. It wasn't red, but a deep purple theme diffused around him. His only eye closed on the visage of Dylan's light, bathing a tunnel of enormous teeth surrounding them. The monstrous creature was called the Soul Cauldron. It swallowed all three of them whole. Dylan, the living boy, Zeph, a dead man, and Vermil, a demon witch who lay dormant. Back in Dylan's room, Por stood in Jody's body. All her plans, efforts, and preparations disappeared before her eyes as the portal closed. Zephaniah managed to interfere while clinically dead. No matter. All she had to do is figure out where the sacrifice ended up, and she can finally open the true gate. First thing is first, she needs the scepter. She slowly descended back to the floor. She hung her head in exhaustion. now standing alone in the room. Crap. Wow. Struggle, bro. That was so good. That was so good. I didn't want to stop reading. I probably should have stopped reading. I think I went over the word count, but I didn't want to stop. So you guys don't know, but I had read this chapter before, and I just kind of told Struggle just that it needed some work, and that he said that he had it. And so clearly he had it, because this is phenomenally different and way better. Way better. This is crazy. Like, you don't even know. This is crazy. Sorry, I'm just going back through and reading this chat. Looks like Fluorescent is doing all the feedback, which is great, because I don't really have much to say. No, it was great. I don't really want to say much, because I think that this is like the amount of work that you put into this is so obvious. I want to highlight one thing that I thought was awesome. It was all awesome, but where is it? The marionette line, dude, that was so good. Where is this line? Right here. This is so good. This line is awesome. His posture was that of a marionette crudely lifted by uneven strings. I can envision. So I remember what this was. This was like something about a chimpanzee wanting to attack her, hunched over or something. I remember that line and thinking, oh boy, that needs some work. Dude, you crushed it out of the park with this one line. This right here, I think, is one of the highlights. Optical canals, yeah, that whole thing was crazy. I think the gore is perfect level of gore. I don't know what you guys personally think about when it comes to violence and gore, but clearly this is a story that utilizes violence and gore, right? And I think you utilized it in a really good way, in a way that kind of helped move the story along, and just kind of, it felt like, oh, when you like to watch those like slasher movies, the gore worked in such a way that I felt like I was watching a slasher movie, which is kind of the point, right? Yeah, so good. Um, I see a couple of you guys were offering feedback, which is really good. Um, what a literary voice! I agree. The writer's voice in this is great. Um, yeah, yeah. I don't really have much to say other than praise. I'm trying to think of a line. I'm trying to think of a part where I wasn't just like in it, and I don't really think there was a moment where I was pulled out of the story. Um, I thought the perspective changes. Oh, that's right. Okay, the one thing that I was like, it confused me, but not in such a bad way that it took me out of the story, but just more that I had to realize. It was the very first perspective change that you did between Zeph and Jody, where he dies and then she's still dealing with him, but then he's back. I just I think it just flowed so good that I was almost confused that it changed, because I was like, oh, it's still. I don't know if that's something that you want to look at. I don't even know. I don't even want to offer too much feedback because I don't want to ruin this, because clearly, like, you know what you're talking about. The hourglass was so good, dude. The imagery on the hourglass was awesome. Stefan, thank you so much for the follow, man.
Stefan Boss Hunter is now following.
No, the hourglass imagery was so good. Crushed it. The sea monster lamprey was sick. I almost feel like I wanted more of that. Like, can you do more with that? Because I thought that was terrifying, but in such a good way. But then you kind of didn't really talk about it anymore. I guess maybe that's my one plight with it. That it was so good that I wanted it to be more of like the focus. Like, what was that? The soul cauldron or soul cauldron? Is that what you called it? That thing was cool. Really, really like that. Hi, Stefan. Thank you for joining chat. Anyways, I don't want to keep raving. I'm glazing the story a little bit too hard here. Does anybody else want to say anything? Early tense correction. You had the present tense as well. Oh yeah, there's a couple times the tense changed, but that's easy fixes. That's just polishing. Oh, okay. And she fluorescent literally just said, yeah, this is just polishing at this point. Read my mind. Just a few things to polish, but great. Yeah, I would agree. Add more. That's it. That's all we get at the Soul Cauldron, dude. It's it's sweet. Like maybe like I don't know. Maybe make it more of an emphasis in the scene. Like make it more of the actual setting, because clearly like they're falling into it and it's like coming up, right? Like they're like slowly drifting down and it's coming back up. Maybe make it more of like the setting and really drive home the fact that that they're like basically suspended, because I could totally picture it, and that's why I'm like I want more, because I thought it really nailed this idea that they're descending into into oblivion, but by using a sea monster to basically personify the void. I thought was so good. It's an alternate universe, a tool used by portal transfer. Well, there you go. Yeah. Yep. That's all I got. I'm gonna stop because I'm just going off about how good this is, and yeah, Struggle, you have something special here. I would agree. Do you have the link? Let's open up this link real quick here. I'll post it for you. Guys, go and check out this story, the full thing. Well, it's not completely finished yet, right? You got up to 4 chapters. Go and check it out, guys. All right, to everybody who's in chat, everyone who's lurking in chat, if you enjoyed what I just read, you can read it for yourself. Go to Wattpad, go and check it out. It's an ongoing story. It's excellent so far.